Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the entire Palo Alto City Library, I'd love to welcome you all to tonight's event. We're thrilled to partner once again with the Media Center. This is about our third time working with them. And this program is especially important to us. We feel that the library is certainly a very important part of a community, and I just love the idea that the library is the first place a person, either new to this community or this country, is going to go to find help and resources and entertainment and enjoyment. So we're very pleased to be working again with the Media Center. Like I said, the library is a great place to learn and grow, and we've got all kinds of exciting things happening. And if there's one thing you can take away from tonight's event, which I'm sure we're going to take away quite a bit, is that the library is really the heart of the community, and the more people using the library and its resources and being exposed to new ideas, being literate and informed, really makes our world a much, much better place. So please spread that around. Thank you. All right, so with that, I'm going to have Elliot come up from the Media Center to make our bigger introductions. Thank you all.
Wow, this is so great to see this full house. Welcome. I'm Elliot Margulies, and we are just thrilled. This is a brand new room. It's part of the new Mitchell Park Community Center, and we too are really glad to continue our partnership with the Palo Alto City Library. Ruth Ann has put so many resources into this event, and we just really appreciate the library's generosity. And we're very thankful to Cal Humanities for giving the Media Center a Community Stories grant. Yay! And the Midpen Media Center is just down the road on San Antonio. We've got a state-of-the-art TV studio. In fact, our executive director is here, and our board of directors, the chair of our board of directors is here, Barb. And we have lots of camcorders, and they're all publicly accessible. And what underlies all the production activity is our belief that and our commitment to helping individuals and organizations share their stories. And that's why a little over 2 years ago, we launched the Made into America project. We wanted to gather and archive stories of immigration to the U.S. because practically every family in the U.S. has an immigrant story. Everybody has somebody in their family, almost every family, has somebody who gave up everything familiar to them and started a new life from scratch here, often without knowing English and with very few dollars in their pocket, but just a lot of faith in the future. Tonight, we have 6 storytellers who are all dreamers. Now that means they came over as children, they came over the border without papers, and they grew up here. They went to school here. They helped their families financially. And like every little kid, they dreamed about what they would be when they grew up. But they were also undocumented. So that was a secret often that they even kept from other Latino families and friends. And they had to fear deportation that could tear their families apart. They had to wonder, if I make it all the way through college, am I enabled to get a job after that? And they had to live separately from grandparents, cousins, and friends that they left behind, and were not allowed to go back and visit. So tonight, we go behind the labels and the headlines about dreamers to hear their stories. And we're going to hear stories on a deeper level, heart to heart. We are so appreciative that so many people here came to join us this evening, because these are not easy stories. They're not easy to tell, and they're not always easy to listen to. But one thing you will see is that all of them are threaded with courage and with hope. Some will deal with loss, and others will deal with the hardships and challenges of growing up without much income. But I think you'll be happy that you came tonight. I just want to mention that none of our storytellers has ever done this before. I can almost hear their hearts beating through their chests right now. They're not theater students, they're not entertainers, but what they are is our neighbors, and they're part of our community. So in the spirit of community, and a couple of hundred of us getting together as friends, we really welcome you and the supportive presence that you bring tonight. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Francisco Jimenez. Talk about the dream team. He would have been a dreamer if they had that term back when his family came over the border, probably in the 40s, and worked in the fields. And even though he had to start school a couple of months later than all the other kids after the harvest was over in Santa Maria, his love of learning led him all the way to a PhD from Columbia University and a distinguished career at Santa Clara University. And maybe more importantly tonight, to a series of memoirs that he wrote about the different phases of his life. And I was pretty amazed when he agreed to participate in this project. And it was only a couple of months later that I realized, Francisco, it's really hard for him to say no to anyone. But we still feel really lucky. And after the first workshop with our storytellers, every one of them asked him if they could take a selfie with him. So he's well documented. He's a joy to work with. And we're so glad he'll open up tonight's storytellers and introduce everyone. So come on up, Francisco.
Thank you, Elliot. And thank you all of you for coming. Unlike my friend Elliot, I work from a text. And so I will make a few remarks that are personal, and then I will do the introductions. So as Elliot indicated, he and I had the pleasure of working with 6 wonderful young men and women. They are extraordinary dreamers who have remarkable stories to tell. And I have the privilege of introducing them in a little while. Getting to know them and hearing their stories brought back memories of my own childhood, growing up in a family of undocumented farm workers. I saw myself in them. When I was 4 years old, my family left Mexico and crossed the U.S.-Mexican border without authorization. We immigrated to the United States to escape our poverty and to begin a new and better life. We led a hard life filled with strenuous work, stress, and anxiety about finding work and being caught by La Migra, the Border Patrol. I lived in constant fear for 10 long years. When I was in the 8th grade, we were deported back to Mexico. But thanks to Ito, the Japanese sharecropper for whom we picked strawberries and who sponsored us, we later returned to the United States with authorization. It is not surprising, then, that I welcome the opportunity to work with Elliot on this important and timely event. It has been a privilege and a joy. Like many other dreamers, these successful and inspiring dreamers whose stories you're about to hear have already made wonderful contributions to their community, to our society. And it is truly unfortunate that our government has lacked the political will to enact legislation that would permit our nation to benefit fully from the intelligence, talent, ingenuity, and perseverance of this new generation of immigrants. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce him to you. Our first storyteller is Lalo. Eulalio was born and raised in Aquiles, Cerdán, Michoacán, Mexico. He first arrived in the United States at the age of 12 and is a first-generation college student. This September, he will begin at UC Santa Cruz to study for his Bachelor of Arts. He is an active advocate for youth, immigrant, and LGBT rights. His dreams are of opening a small family business. It is my pleasure to present to you Lalo.
I was born in Aquiles Cerdán, Michoacán, Mexico. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings. I'm the baby. I was raised in a house in which our walls were made out of adobe. Our roofing were overlapping pieces of rusty metal sheets and pieces of wood. But I was lucky because we had pavement as flooring when most of the houses around us only had dirt. I also come from a family of farm workers. Growing up, I was always out in the open fields with my dad. He would teach me about how to milk a cow. He taught me about acres. He taught me how to pull weeds straight from the dirt, root out, so they wouldn't hurt our crops. That changed very soon. When I was 6, my dad decided to come to the United States. A couple years later, when I was 8, both of my sisters and my brother decided to start their own lives. So I was alone. I was left with my mom back in Mexico. Around that time, my mom wanted to pull me out of elementary school because we didn't have much money. She said, "You have to come and work with me." And education isn't a right, it's a privilege where I come from, and I wasn't guaranteed that. Luckily, my professor at the time, Professor Martin, convinced her to keep me in elementary school. So she did. I graduated, and the day that I graduated, I was so happy, but I was also sad. I remember during graduation, I got to read a poem, and I was reading this crumbled piece of paper, but I was so nervous, and I was shaking, and I was sweating. After I graduated, I went up to my mom, and I said, "Okay, well, what's next?" She said, "That's it." I was really sad, and I cried for about 2 weeks. I cried, and I begged her to please enroll me in middle school. Eventually, with the assistance of Professor Martin, once again, she decided to enroll me in middle school with one condition. She said, "You are going to be working in the fields with me so you can help pay for your lunches and your uniforms because I can't do it alone." So I agreed. Every morning, every Saturday and Sunday morning, really early, she would pull down my blankets, she would shake me, and she would say, "Eulalio, get up, we have to go to work, you have to get ready." I would stand up and start getting ready. Put on my pants, put on my shoes, and as I was doing this, she was out in the kitchen cutting open pieces of bread and stuffing them with beans and cheese. That was going to be our lunch for that day. I would walk up to the kitchen, meet my mom, and then we would leave our house. We were about to walk to the contractor's house, the person who had hired us to work in their fields that day. As we walked, I remember it was so dark, I could still see the stars up in the sky. I could hear the dogs barking out in the horizon, and I could smell lilies as I walked, pulling down from my mom's pants. We would arrive at the contractor's house, hop in the back of a truck, and drive about 30 minutes to the fields where we would work. We would arrive as the sun was barely coming out of the hills. The fields smell musky as they had just been watered the day before. the first thing that my mom would tell me when we would arrive, she would say, "Take off your shoes. Take off your shoes." So I would. It was because it was the only pair of shoes that I owed. And that's how we would work the strawberry fields. After that, we would get ready for work. So I would take off my socks, roll up my pants all the way to my knees so they wouldn't get dirty with the mud. Then we would grab a wooden box, which we called a burro. Literal translation is a donkey, but it's not related. This was similar to a burro. This is where we would collect the strawberries. This is how we collected strawberries in the fields of Michoacan. After this, we would pick out the first row in which we would be working at. I would always pick the first one because it was always the smallest. So how we would pick strawberries is, we would, step on the mud. That was my least favorite part because the mud was so cold that it would numb my feet. I used to talk to my mom and say, "I don't like this." She said, "Don't worry, it'll warm up." Never really warmed up. After that, we would begin collecting the strawberries. So the trick was to just explore the strawberry plants. Likewise, you would find the reddest, ripest strawberry, and the trick was to cut it at the stem with your thumbnail, clip it, and put it in the box. One more, put it in the box. That's how we would make our money. I would always get in trouble because I rarely would clip the strawberry at the stem. I would always hold it and yank it. And my mom would yell at me. She would say, "Don't do that. You don't know what that means." That meant that I wasn't going to be paid as much because the strawberries were bruised. We did this for about 2 years. After working every weekend and my mom every day, we decided that it wasn't enough. We couldn't get by. We packed our stuff inside a backpack, said goodbye to my friends and my family, and we drove straight to Tijuana, where we would cross the border. I was 12 years old. How we crossed the border, it was inside the trunk of a car. There was 5 of us. We were arranged by size. I was the smallest one back then. We were told to get in one by one, stacked perfectly like pieces of wood. I got in last, and the coyote said to me, she said to us, she gave us very specific instructions. She said, "No one say anything. You all be quiet. If anyone talks, we'll get caught. Wait for me to open the door again. Do you all understand?" We all nodded. She locked the door. Bam. We drove for about 30 minutes. It got hot really quickly. I could feel my mom's sweat in the back of my neck. It smells like oil. And we could hear I could sense the car moving. After about 30 minutes, the car stopped. They opened up the trunk, and I had never been happier to see the sun again. After that, we settled with my family in Napa. I was undocumented, I was 12. They enrolled me in middle school. I graduated middle school, then started high school at the age of 14. This was in 2004. I was doing everything right. I was learning English, I was going to school. But when I was 17, I decided that I would get a job. So because my employment options were limited, I decided to get a job at the McDonald's, which was right in front of my house. So I did. Then I graduated high school a year after that. And my mom said to me, "That's it. You're done. I've done all my responsibilities. Whatever you want to do from here forward, it's all on you." I decided to enroll at Napa Valley Community College, and I would pay for my books and my fees through the money that I would earn from McDonald's. Working day in and day out. However, I was very afraid. I was always afraid of deportation. So I had been following comprehensive immigration reform, and I had been following the DREAM Act. In 2010, when the DREAM Act came up to a vote, this was the closest we've been, I decided to cut class that day. I cut class and I went straight to the library. I wanted to see the senators vote in vote in live as the votes would come. I was sitting in the computer lab right in front of this laptop. The room was full of people. The votes were coming in. Yes, no, 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 yes. And in the end, we were 5 votes short. We were 5 votes short from the DREAM Act. The phone calls, the emails, the letters, they had been pointless. It felt pointless at that moment. I remember my face getting red in anger. Then I started crying. I started crying uncontrollably. That meant that I was still going to be afraid of being deported. I was going to be afraid while I was driving a car down the road in the fear that it would be taken away from me. And I felt like I was doing everything right. A couple years later, in 2012, President Barack Obama gave us what is called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or we call it DACA. We were given the opportunity to work legally in the United States. Those of us who are called dreamers, young people who were brought to the United States. I was afraid to apply at the beginning. I was afraid because I thought this was a trap, a setup for the government to get my information and send me back. I didn't want to go back to the fields. But I applied either way. The day that I received my DACA approval, I went up to McDonald's and I said, "I'm leaving, I'm done, goodbye, I'm gonna get another job." And the manager said, "Don't leave, I will make you a store manager. You will get your own store, stay with me." I ran home and I said, Mom, I got this job permit, so I'm leaving McDonald's. And she said, "Why are you doing that? That's what we're here for. We're here to work. Stop wasting your time taking those classes and just get to work." But I didn't listen to her. I kept taking my classes at the community college. That was about 8 years ago. Now I am getting ready to transfer to UC Santa Cruz, the first person from my entire family. When I received my acceptance letter to UC Santa Cruz, I was so happy. I opened it and I said, the first person I called was my mom, and I called her and I said, "Mom, I'm accepted. I'm going in." They accepted me. And there was a pause. And for the first time in so many years, my mom said to me, "If there's anything I can do to help you, please call me." It has been a growth process for both of us, for myself, but especially for my mom. More than anything, I want to be a role model for my nieces and nephews. And ultimately, I want to be an advocate for farm workers. Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Valeria. Valeria works at a local high school as an instructional aide for the special education department. She's a wonderful role model and an inspiration to all students. She came to the United States when she was 13 years old. Valeria?
There are so many stories I could tell you guys today. For example, the first time that we tried to cross the border and we had to walk 2 days to later be caught by the migra and return to Mexico. Or my journey to college as an undocumented student. But the story that I tell you guys today that I decided to share with you is about a wonderful woman, a strong, brave, and who never gave up on life. My mother. When I was 15 years old, my mom passed away. She died of cancer, and I was nowhere near to help her. In a way, I was lucky because I've had only been away from her 2 years. My brothers and sisters hadn't seen my mother in 5 or 10 years because they had decided to come to the U.S. to get a better life, to work, and to provide for their families. I had come to the U.S. when I was 13 years old because one of my sisters was getting married. It was a really exciting time. But my mom had to stay back in Mexico because her visa wasn't approved. My mom wasn't a selfish person because she always encouraged us to keep going, to be brave, and to achieve our dreams. So after my sister's wedding, my brothers and sisters asked me if I wanted to stay in the U.S., and I told them yes. Somehow I got the idea that I could go to college and get an education so I could provide for my mom, so I could help her out. When we told my mom that, she was okay with it. And at I don't know if she realized, like the last time I saw her, she took me to the airport in Michoacan, and I feel that unconsciously she knew that I wasn't gonna come back because it was the only time that I've seen her cry. Since that day, I've always tried to hold on to that image of her. Some days I caught myself staring at people with their moms, and there's a jealousy in it. Because I wish that could be me. It's not that my mom didn't want to come to the U.S. She tried many times to cross the border, but she wasn't successful. She wanted to see her kids and grandchildren. After my mom passed away, for a long time, I felt numb. There was so much anger and pain. I really didn't talk to anyone about it. So I started acting up like a typical teenager. I started skipping school. My grades went down. And I felt that there was no point to life. All I wanted to do was help my mom, provide for her. It was until one day, one of my dearest friends, my teacher at that time, my ESL teacher, she asked me to stay after school and told me, she went straight to the point. she told me, "Do you think you skipping school is okay? Do you think your mom will be proud of you?" It was at that moment that I felt disappointed in myself because I had given up, and that's not what my mom would wanted of me. So eventually, I made it to UC Santa Cruz. I graduated in 2012. I still remember like it was yesterday. It's been a couple of years. But I remember it because my whole family was there. My brothers, my sisters, their husband, their wives, my nephews, from like 5 years to like 18. It was, let me say, there was more than like 30 people there cheering for me. In 2012, I was lucky enough of President Obama passed DACA, and with that, it gave me the chance to get a license, and but most importantly, get a work permit. I was graduating college, and I never thought that I would be able to work legally in the U.S. Now I work at a high school as a aide for teachers, even though in high school I was like, I would never be a teacher. Eventually, I want to get my master's in special ed. I don't know where I would be. I don't know where I would be without my family. I actually don't know where I will be next week, 5 years from now. But I know I will have my family because I was blessed to have a family who has always supported me, because that's why my mom taught us to be united and to always love each other. So I know that I will be fine because I have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Valeria. Our third participant is Rafael. Rafael is the director of an after-school and summer program. He creates quality sports programs and enrichment programs for youth and adults. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in public management with a specialization in human resources from Colorado State University, and is currently pursuing a master's in organizational leadership at the University of San Francisco. He was brought to this country at a very early age. Rafael.
As I was playing with my little red toy Tonka trunk on the metal casting of the patio of my grandparents' home, I could see soldiers holding guns in their hands. And I remember my uncle saying that there were some angry campesinos and they were protecting the church in the front. I just kept playing with my truck, and then my grandpa kindly rubs me in the back. Mijo, ya es tiempo para agarrar tu mochila. It's time to get your backpack for your trip to San Francisco. So I walk back, grab my truck, look at my mom's picture, smile, because I was so excited to finally see her. I asked my grandpa if I could ride in the back of the pickup truck with my uncle. I love to be in the back of the pickup truck because you get to smell the fresh pupusas being made on the streets. You get to smell the elote frito. You get to smell the beautiful smells of El Salvador. Most importantly, Antiguo Cuscatlán, which was my birthplace. As I see the mountains in the back of the pickup truck, the car starts, and we just go down the street, and I could just see the mountains, the green pastures, the beautiful people, and most importantly, the smell of the pupusas. When we arrived to the airport, it was so hot, but I could finally see a plane, and it was so close. I just thought to myself about the excitement of actually being on an airplane for the first time. Pretty exciting. And most importantly, I was able to see my brother and mother again. I was very nervous, and my hands were sweaty. My head was sweaty. As I was grabbing the window of the airport window, I could see the airplane leaving, and I was making circle hearts. Is it going to be this one? Is it going to be that one? And it was the sweat dripping down on my fingers. And I just thought, wow, I get to be on one of those. My abuelito taps me on the back and says, "Mijo, ya es tiempo para ir." And I turn around, and I see my grandpa look up, and he was crying. My grandpa didn't really cry much. And I was like, "Why are you sad, abuelito? You said I'd be back in 2 weeks." "Sí, mijo. Sí, mijo. I'm just happy for you." As he grabs my hand, he walks me to Don Luis. He was my adopted father. I had to remember his name and where he lived, which was San Francisco. He was the person that was going to take me to my mother. And I couldn't forget his name, where he lived, and my birthplace, Antigua Cusatlan, El Salvador. Because if I didn't remember those things, I wouldn't be able to have pizza with my mom. And she told me on the phone, "Mijo, this is the best pizza. You have to remember those 3 things." And so I did my best in practice with my family. And I met Don Luis, and he walked with me to the airplane. And in the airplane, my hands were just sweating still. And I was in the middle seat, and I felt like I needed to move. So I just told Don Luis, "I'm going to go to sleep." And that's what I did. I went to sleep. As the airplane man says, "You have arrived in San Francisco," I awoke. And it was time to finally see my mom. But first, we needed to go to the line. And my grandparents told me that it would be a long line, and that there would be people right in front of me asking me questions. And I needed to remember those 3 things, and also, hello. So I did that. And as I was going to the front of the line, I finally got a chance to pull out my truck and look at it and play with it a little bit. And then we get to the front of the line, and as Don Luis is talking to the man with the shiny badge and huge hands, I just look, and he asks me questions, and I just say, "Hi." He asks me another question, "Hi." And then a third, "Hi." And then he goes, "Have a great trip." I had no idea what he was saying. And then we walked through these big metal doors. And that moment, I will never forget. I heard, "Rafita, Rafita." It was my mother. It was the first time that I heard my mother's voice, not over the phone, but live. She ran to me. I ran to her. I grabbed her so hard. I said, "I missed you, Mom." She said, "I've been waiting 4 years for this, my hijo. 4 long years. And you're finally here. And I will never leave you again." That was the first time I've ever felt a warm hug from my mother. I will never forget it. Right after that hug, my brother, Gio, says, "Hermanito, what's up?" You know, he's so excited to see me, and he grabs my hair and he messes it up. I had curly hair back in there. And And he just grabs me, and I just grab him, and we start playing. And my mom started talking to Don Luis, and I could hear the cool music in the airport, 80s music. And I start walking, and he's like, "Where are you going? Don't get lost. This is a big place. We're going to go to La Misión. That's where we're from. That's where we're going to play a little bit more. And I'm going to take you to McDonald's." And I said, "Okay." I didn't know what that was. So we start walking down the airport, and we go back, and my mom says, "Are you ready to have your first American pizza?" And I said, "Yeah," And we start walking to the car. I grab my bag. I grab my truck, and we start walking to the parking lot. And my mom says, "Let me get your bag, mijo. Go play with your brother." And I just remember that because it was the first time my mom gave me something, an instruction to do. So I did it. I went and played with my brother. We got to the parking lot, and a car with lights starts appearing as we were waiting, and it was a red truck. I look at my red truck. I look at my mom. I look at the red truck again. She says, "Powerful toy, mijo. Powerful toy." Today, I appreciate my mother and the opportunity she provided for my brother and I. She was and still is a house cleaner and a missionary who loves her job. She instilled great work ethic and a foundation of serving people through the love of God. Having the support of my family in El Salvador has helped me keep strong my Salvadoreño roots. And with the blessing of becoming a U.S. citizen, I am able to go back to my country and continue to help my family in any way that I can, as well as my mother's missionary work. The years apart from my parents helped me build a strong character and determination, but most importantly, helped me build hope. A hope that I instill every single day in the work that I do at the Siena Youth Center, at the San Leandro Boys and Girls Club where I used to work, and at the Orange Park Boys and Girls Club where I was saved. Today, I still remember somebody putting a whistle on my neck and saying, "We believe in you." That's what I tell youth every single day, and I'll continue to do it. Thank you.
Carolina. She has a beautiful smile. Carolina is a junior in high school and a star student. She also works part-time at a local Safeway store. She has wonderful leadership skills and is strongly committed to making a difference in her community. She was 1 year old when she was brought to this country. So it's my pleasure to present to you Carolina.
So let me start off by saying that I'm a junior in high school, and like most juniors, I feel like this has been one of the most stressful years in my high school career. And no, it's not because I'm worried whether or not I get a good score in my SAT or ACT, or whether or not I get my driver's license, or whether or not my dress is going to look better than anybody else's at prom. And no, it's not because I don't want to worry about these things. I simply can't afford to. So let me explain. I was brought to this country at the age of 1 with my 2 parents and my 2 older sisters. When we arrived to this country, we ended up living in a small studio with my grandma. And let me explain when I say the word studio. I don't mean an apartment with a bedroom. I mean a small studio. I mean living room, kitchen, bathroom, all together. And at that time, there were 7 people living in that small studio. And how we managed to do it and not kill each other, it still amazes me. At the age of 4, my grandmother passed away. And that had a huge impact in my life because it was the first time I realized what death meant. I remember the day that my grandmother passed away and the night that we were keeping watch on her. Her relatives and friends came. And I didn't know my grandmother was dead back then. I thought she was just taking a really long nap. So I walked up to her, and I remember tugging at her shoulder, saying over and over again, "Despierta, wake up." But she didn't reply. When I turned 5, my dad said it was finally time to move out. And of course, I was very sad that my grandmother passed away, but I was also excited that we were moving to a new house, that I was gonna finally have my own bedroom and even my own bed. Up to that point, I had always shared my bed with my 2 older sisters. And I promised myself, my 5-year-old self, that I was gonna keep a collection of strawberry scented stickers and paste them all over my walls. But unfortunately, we ended up moving to another studio in the same neighborhood. So much for my strawberry scented sticker collection. When I started high school, my freshman year, that was the first time I realized what undocumented really was. I remember watching the Spanish noticias or news with my mom, and I remember hearing that hundreds of illegal aliens were deported because of a checkpoint. I asked my mom, well, what does an illegal alien mean? I always thought it meant those green guys with big black eyes, so I didn't know what they were talking about. She looked at me and she said that an illegal alien, well, those people were us. And I said, well, what do you mean? She told me that that phrase was used to describe people who had illegally come to this country and were now residing in the US. You know, up to that point, I always knew that I was born in Mexico, but I never knew that that was going to be an issue of some sort. And I was more confused than ever. But I kept doing my thing, I kept going to school, and in 2012, President Obama said that DACA, granted DACA basically, and I applied for it. I really didn't know what that was at first, but I knew that I was going to get a social security number, and a social security number meant that I could work. So when I turned 16, our family economical situation started getting worse. We were paying about $1,300 for that small studio, with only my dad working and getting $500 each week. My 2 sisters were in college, so at that point they didn't really have to worry about anything. But I saw my dad, and he has been working for the company about 16 or 17 years. And out of all the workers, he's one of the hardest working employees there. I see him rain or shine, 100 degrees, 60 degrees, pushing carts outside every day. He never complains. So when I turned 16, I said, I'm gonna get a job too, I'm gonna help my dad out. Because at that point we didn't know if we were gonna be sleeping in a car the next day because we couldn't pay the rent. So when I turned 16, I got a job. And I would work overtime. I would ask my managers, can you please give me more hours? I would skip school some days because I was so tired from working. I would work 12-hour shifts, but I never complained because I know that that's something my dad always taught me. Never complain about work because of work. That's why you're living, that's why you have a roof over your head. With every check I got, I gave 2/3 of it to my dad for rent, and the other third I would give to my mom. They never asked me work. They never told me, they never forced it upon me to help them out, but I knew it was my responsibility. So I did. And up till now, I'm still working in the same job. I'm still asking for more hours, but I'm really happy And I know that my dad is really proud of me. So every time I give him the money, he says, "Gracias, mija. Dios te lo pague y te dé más." Now, my dad is close to retiring age. I don't know if he's gonna get the retirement opportunities that are offered because of his social security and immigration situation. My mom says that we might have to go to Florida and work in the fields. But I don't want my mom to work in the fields because I know how hard that work can be. I don't know if I'm gonna drop out of school and have to start helping out. I really hope that whatever happens in the future, I do get to go to college. And I know in the long run, it benefits us more if I do go to college and then help my parents out. But in the meantime, I don't see it that way. We live day to day. We don't know if we're gonna be kicked out of where we live. But one thing we do know is that wherever we go, we will work hard. And even though my parents couldn't be here today for various personal reasons, I love them very much, and they're my motivation to keep working hard. So thank you.
Our fifth storyteller is Angel. Angel is also a dreamer who came to California at the age of 10. He received his BA in Latino Studies and Spanish from San Francisco State University and his master's and teaching credential from the University of San Francisco. He is currently a teacher in East San Jose, and it's my pleasure to present to you Angel.
So first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Elliot for extending this opportunity to us to be able to tell our stories and give us a voice, because that's something that a lot of us undocumented dreamers don't have, hiding behind shadows and trying to make sure that the least amount of people know about our situation. So I'm really grateful to be able to stand here and tell you guys this story. And I want to make sure that you guys remember that this story, my father's story, is not unique. It's a story that repeats often, way too often, and I am constantly reminded of. And anybody who's been through this situation gets reminded of every single day. For me, when I wrote about this, I was reminded of through a letter that arrived at our home addressed to our father. So I guess the story begins in 1996 when I was 4 years old. My brother, my mom, myself, and my father lived in this small town in Michoacan, and we didn't have running water. We barely had electricity. We didn't really have a ceiling, and we struggled every single day to make a living and just to survive in general. So my father took it upon himself to travel to El Norte, to the United States, and try to become a better supporter for us from there. I actually don't remember much about my dad from back then. I don't remember what he looked like or how he was. I just remember that my mother told us that he left on a plane. So every time I would see a plane fly by Singio, municipio de Álvaro Obregón in Michoacán, Mexico, I would go outside and I would wave and I would wave and I would scream, "Papá, papi, adios," because I saw that plane was the one that he was traveling on. Over the next couple of years, we settled for communicating through phone calls with him, letters that he would send every once in a while, and a little bit of money that he could send to us. But it was hard, especially hard on my mother, who had to keep working, and now she was also being my father and teaching us all of the fatherly things that somebody was supposed to teach us. At some point, my dad came back to visit. He knocked on the door, and me and my brother opened it, and then we saw this huge, scary-looking brown man. We couldn't recognize him. He had more muscle than anybody I had ever seen, even struggled to just come in through the doorway. He looked scary, and he looked really proud. And that's how I remember him. When he told me he was my dad, I just kept touching his face, trying to make sure that he was real and not a figment of my imagination. And that's the way I remember him. He had this look on his face like he had it all figured out. 30 days later, he left again. After waiting for another year, my mom got tired and she decided that it was time for her to leave as well. And then in 2002, she sent for my brother and I to come to the United States. In the United States, we did fairly well. For the first couple of years, though, we stayed in this immigrant home where a lot of families lived. There was many of us living in that home. Eventually, though, we made our way out of that home, and my mother and father had stable jobs. My brother and myself kept up with our studies, and we kept out of trouble. My mother worked really hard at the beauty salon she was at, and my father had been in construction for over 10 years, so he was really well known around the area and always had a job lined up. So I guess you could say we were making strides towards that American dream, and we really never expected anything to happen. And then it did. It was my freshman year in college, and I was excited. I was a college student, but not just any college student. I was an American college student. It's that, you know, the ones that you see on the TV, that was gonna be me. I was excited. So that weekend, I decided to get in my car and go to Stockton, where I was gonna party and have some fun and do American college student things, whatever that is. 5 minutes after arriving there, we got this phone call, and it pretty much shattered me. I got back in my car and I drove back to Redwood City as fast as I could, arriving to the outside of the Redwood City Correctional Facility where my entire family was waiting. As I stepped out of the car, my family members, one by one, turned to me, almost as if to ask what to do. If I could fix this one, if I had the answers, and they just kept saying, yo no sé, I don't know. I really didn't know. All I knew that night was that my father had been arrested. I didn't know that night that the rest of my life would change. And that night, once again, I was reminded of what it meant to be unwelcome. So, to this day, we still don't know why my father was arrested. We went to the hearing, we checked the records, but at some point, all of the stories get told differently. Something about a broken taillight, something about alcohol, something about the passenger in the car carrying something. But at the end of the day, the stories are always foggy, and at the end of the day, all they really needed was a reason, and they had one. So my father was behind bars, and for the first couple of months, we weren't even able to see him because with it, we lacked proper identification, whatever that means. So we settled for having friends of friends with driver's licenses relay messages back and forth for us. He told us how everything was gonna be okay, how he was gonna be out soon. He even told us he had just cashed his paycheck. The police officer told him to leave it in the car, but when we went to get the car from where they had stashed it, there was no money left. And then he told me that as the eldest, I was now the man of the house. Eventually, he got transferred to a immigration facility in San Francisco, then out to another jail in the North Bay, and then to Glenn Meyer facility in Oakland. And that's where we were finally able to go see him. So we would go about once a week, usually on Sundays after church, because my mom begged us to go and pray so that something good could come out of this. So we would go, we would talk to him, leave some money whenever we could. We would do that jail thing where you put your hand against the glass and they touch it. And it was the worst feeling because we were so close, and yet still so far away. We would tell him about how good we were doing. I would tell him about college, about all the great activities we were doing. We would tell him about how I was going to my sister's parent-teacher conferences. He would tell us how good things were going for him too, how he was going to be out soon. We didn't talk about deportation. We didn't talk about how scared we were not to see him again. We didn't tell him about how anxious we were to not be able to see him, touch him, hug him, or just be next to him ever again. We went every week, and every time I visited, the strong and proud aura that he had slowly diminished little by little. And every time I kept going, he looked smaller and smaller and smaller, and one day he just looked broken. We didn't tell them about us losing our home. We didn't tell them about the car that they had gotten repossessed, about the extra hours my mom had spent in her job. We didn't tell them about how much my mother cried, my sister cried, and how little my brother and I did. We worked so hard. We worked so hard, and it seems like everything that we worked for got taken away. My dad's 17 years, my mom's 10, and our 8. And at some point, we ended up having to move back to that immigrant home that we started with, where my mother and my sister shared the bed, and my brother and I shared the floor. My brother and myself shared the floor, while my mother and my sister shared the bed. And we stayed there for a couple of years. My father was transferred once again to another facility in Southern California, and then one more time to Arizona, and then finally deported back to Mexico, where he was told if he were to come back, he would spend at least 10 years in jail. So he decided it was best to stay. Our family here is working hard to get back on our feet. As you guys heard, we've had a couple successes in my family. My mother and my sister eventually moved out of that immigrant home. My brother and I stayed because we wanted to stick together. My father, on the other hand, still struggles every single day trying to get used to the idea of not living in the United States, of not being able to get a job, of not being with us, of being by himself. So whenever we can, we send him money about once a month, or we contact him about once a month, just like he did when he was in the US and we were in Mexico. Being undocumented means that I can't go see him if I want to continue my life in the US. And everything still hurts. Everything hurts so much. Every time that I am reminded of it, and I get reminded of every single day, whether it's walking by somebody that looks like him, whether it's by hearing the news of another immigration reform getting denied, or this time when we got a letter in the mail addressed to him. So my brother and myself, we try to stay strong. We try to be big. We try to be scary, just like him. And always have this look on our face that lets everyone know that everything is gonna be okay and we got it all figured out. Thank you.
And our last storyteller is Dulce, which means sweet. And Dulce was born in Michoacan, Mexico. And when she was 8 years old, her family immigrated to the United States and settled in Hayward. And after graduating from high school, Dulce went to Ripon College in Wisconsin, where she earned her BA in psychology. She is currently in a credential program to become a special education teacher. Dulce?
You might think it's strange that an undocumented 17-year-old from a Mexican background from this beautiful, diverse Bay Area chose to go to school in the middle of nowhere. Ripon, Wisconsin, a small white town, 7,700 residents. My college was smaller than my high school, just about 1,000 students, mostly güeros. During my first few days in Ripon, I didn't see a single brown face. Talk about culture shock, real talk. I didn't see a brown face until I found that the men's soccer team had one Latino, and in fact, Alvaro was undocumented and from the Bay, just like me. I'm walking downtown historic Ripon, wondering if I'll see a brown face around. And after some time, I find this cute little store called Ocampo's Market. So of course I hurry right in, surrounded by shelves of gancitos, barritas, taquis, and jarritos. I feel at home. And I approach the person behind the counter. Hola, ¿cómo está? He seems surprised that I speak Spanish. Soy Víctor, soy el dueño. After bonding over being from California and being undocumented, I leave with my gancitos and my barritas, and the beginning of a beautiful friendship that lasted throughout my years of college. a connection to home. Maybe you wonder how I found Ripon College, let alone why I would choose Ripon College for my college experience. Like many of the decisions I have made in my life, it had to do with one thing, which is a message that I have internalized from being a part of Summer Search. Summer Search is an amazing leadership program for low-income students that opened my eyes to many new things. When I was 15, Summer Search sent me on a wilderness expedition that was physically terrifying. I went backpacking in the North Carolina forest for 22 days. I didn't shower for 22 days. And I carried more than 50 pounds on my back day after day, hiking miles and miles. After I finished that hour-bound course, I felt ready for any challenge in life. I came back and I thought, yeah, I can go to four-year college after high school while being undocumented. I'll make it happen. I had all the confidence in the world. And that summer, through the hour-bound course, I learned that the most growth and the deepest joy comes from the most challenging experiences. So when it came to selecting a college, of course I picked Ripon. I picked Ripon because it was the farthest away from anything familiar and because it would be a huge challenge. And I'm so grateful that I did because I learned many wonderful things. So the summer after I completed my first year of college, I had to raise over $18,000 to afford my second academic year, the struggle. And over the summer, I was only able to raise $9,000, so I was 9 short. So when I went in the fall, I only had enough money for my first semester. And my summer search mentor had a great idea. She suggested that I look for housing off campus because maybe that could save me some money. And so I reached out to Lindsay, who was a mentor. I went into her office and I said, Lindsay, I'm undocumented. I don't have enough money for next semester. I need your help. And so what she did was she put out an ad on my behalf to the entire Ripon community. And it was answered by Mr. Paul Jeffries, a Ripon College professor, and his wife, Ruth. It's Wednesday, October 26, 2011. I walk over to meet Paul at his home. I follow him through the side door that leads straight into the kitchen. He quickly shows me the cabinets and the fridge spaces that would be mine to use. I noticed the small teacups and plates up on shelves. He shows me the living room, the beautiful dining room, and he explains his and Ruth's history of taking people in and how they consider housemates as part of their family. He says, let me show you your room, and he leads me upstairs. I notice how big their house is. 2 stories, 2 rooms, 2 people. It's bigger than my house in Hayward. 3 rooms, 8 people. It's bigger than any house I've ever lived in. Paul says to me, Ruth and I would be happy to have you stay here. We would not expect much for rent. We'd mainly expect some chores around the house. And I said, of course, anything. So a few days later, Ruth invites me over for tea. She's very big on tea, hence the small teacups and plates. She has a whole collection. It's a snowy Saturday morning, and I walk over to meet Paul and Ruth for tea. And we sit around the beautiful big dining table, sipping on tea, talking about life. And it already feels like family. They ask me about my undocumented status. I share about the struggle to pay for college and share my gratitude for them taking me in. It's January 2012, and I move in. Ruth, she would be gone during the week because she worked at Lawrence University, which was 42 miles away. So during the week, it was mainly Paul and I in their big, beautiful house. And it was the second week that I was home. Paul says, I'm going to a conference for a few days in Chicago. You're going to be alone in the house. Just don't go throwing a house party, he said jokingly, of course. And I thought to myself, I would never. And really? You're trusting me alone in your house? You just met me. You don't even know me. In undocumented families, it's not easy to trust. There are so many ways to get in trouble with authorities. It can lead to deportation. The Jeffries and I, we were always talking. One of my first Friday nights, as we wrap up dinner, Ruth says, "Oh, I hope we're not boring you. You probably want to be out with your friends on a Friday night." And I say to both of them, "Are you kidding? There's no place I would rather be." I was home with family. And every Saturday morning, Ruth would walk up the stairs and come knock on my bedroom door. And she would say, "Good morning, sweet Dulce. We're going to have breakfast. Want to join?" And I would, every time. Paul would make omelets. He's the omelet master. I would chop veggies for Ruth and I. Paul liked his omelets simple and veggie-free. We'd all hold hands and we'd say grace. Then we would eat and talk about life. And that spring, Victor transformed his cute little Mexican store into a restaurant. And when I told him about my financial challenges, he offered me a job waitressing. So I would come in and speak in Spanish for a few hours, enjoy food from Guerrero, and work a little bit. When I graduated, May 2013, the Jeffries threw me a huge graduation party. Victor was there. So were other members of the Ripon community. The Jeffries had rallied together to support my educational goals. It was a full house, and it was filled with love. The Jeffries were one of my first really close non-Latino friends, and they taught me many things. One of the things that they taught me was to say grace before each meal. They taught me that my home is inside of me, and they taught me to love. They teach me to love. They still teach me a lot of things today. They're very present in my life. I would have never heard of Ripon if it hadn't been for Summer Search. And I would have never heard of Summer Search if it weren't for Puente, a college prep program at my high school. I would have never heard of Puente if it hadn't been for my mom and her being so involved in middle school and being so invested in my education. Graduating from college is my proudest accomplishment in life thus far. And I know that I was only successful because of so many of my mentors in life, and especially the town of Ripon. My graduation was a community effort, and my college experience was so meaningful and so special. I went to school in a small white town, and I found family, brown and white. I went to the farthest thing away from anything familiar, and I found home. And so I know that the most growth and the deepest joy comes from me stepping out of my comfort zone and pushing myself. Thank you.
Your stories have enriched all of us and have helped us to become more fully human. In conclusion, what I would like to do is to read a quote from a memoir cited in a recent book titled Lives in Limbo, Undocumented and Coming of Age in America by Roberto J. Gonzalez. And this is the quote from the memoir. "There is apathy under the eyelids of this country, and we cannot see what's right in front of us. It's hard to convince someone to do well in school when the law tells them that it won't matter when you're a number before you're a face. How convenient that we forget our own history, a country of immigrants who we were once told we didn't belong, an assemblage of faces simply waiting for our country to see us, unquote.
You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience, and our storytellers couldn't have done it any better. You put in so much work. So proud of you. I know some of you might want to actually talk to them or meet them, and so we encourage you to stay a while. If there's some food I see still left, we don't want to see any of it left, so please eat. We wish that all these stories could end so much more where you want it to be and happy, and yet the Supreme Court, you probably read last week, decided that they would block President Obama's attempt to make it safer for the parents of dreamers and make them able to get legal jobs. So the story goes on, but so does their courage and their faith and our ability to be their friends. Mostly, we just so appreciate your giving a night and being a witness and giving so much heart tonight. So give yourselves a hand and thank you.